Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. My gosh, I wish I was there in person, obviously. You live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and it's always a treat to get there. I'm going to share my slides now, and hopefully technological problems will not hang us up. And then we will begin. I trust you can all see my slides. And let's begin, I guess, right? It says here, make this presentation more inclusive by turning on subtitles. Sure, not sure what that means, but we'll do it. Oh, wow. So now every time I speak, obviously it says things so everyone can listen to it. Wow, that's amazing. All right, let's begin. So again, thank you all so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. We have an election coming today. We'll spend a reasonable amount of time talking about that. Hopefully we'll have time for Q&A at the end, but let's barge in. Let's begin. GDP. What is GDP? GDP looks at all goods and services in the USA, right? And there's four terms. C, household consumption, the first term. That's the biggest term. 68, 69% of GDP, right? It's huge. Oops, I moved my slide forward and I don't know how to move it back. Let's try the old-fashioned way. And the second term is I, corporate investment in plant and equipment. The third is government spending, G, and the fourth one is net exports. They're not all the same size. The biggest one is C, household consumption, 69% of GDP. It's critically important that people consume things. We need people to have money, hopefully from jobs, and they spend the money. If they don't have jobs, it's a bit of a problem. The government can intervene and give us checks, which is important. There are some downside risks to that we'll talk about too. But all in all, I'm in favor of that, given that the alternative is worse, because we have to keep C up. That's critical to get us to the point when we're beyond this whole coronavirus thing. So let's begin by looking at some of the really good information that's out there and some really good data that we've got, right? The first piece of data is real retail sales. They're absolutely fantastic. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. You can look on the graph on the very far right. It's well higher than it was. So there's been complete recovery. There's good news and bad news because of that. The good news is, hey, great, things are better. That's great, super, we're buying stuff. The problem is we're buying more stuff because we're buying things, goods, as you can see here, but we're not buying services. So some of the reason that the sales in stores and online things have been so good is because we're saving money essentially, because we're not going to Europe, we're not going to a boxing match, we're not going bowling, we're not going horseback riding, we're not going to a hockey game, we're not going to a football game. So we're spending some of that money in goods, buying stuff, but not services. We've lost to date still 2.5 million restaurant jobs have not come back. At its worst, restaurant employment was back where it was in 1997, 23 years ago. That's how bad things got. So the first thing is that we've rearranged our spending patterns. And the second thing is the amount of money we're spending in restaurants, stores here, real stores, isn't going up much because it's recovered. And once something's recovered, it can't keep getting better. So you got to take it and move it to the side and say, we're done with that, it's over. And you can see in this graph here, we had, terrible March and terrible April and May and June, July, August, and September was pretty good actually, a little bit up. But that's not going to be the solution to our economic problems going forward. GDP still got a hole. We'll talk about that later, but there's still a hole. And to plug this hole is going to take work. And the solution's not going to come from retail sales because it's done. Similarly, it's not going to come from vehicle sales. This is light vehicle sales, so cars and light trucks, things that we buy, SUVs and crossovers and sport utility vehicles and so on. Those sales have been really good too. We're going to get the numbers for last month, for October. We're going to get them today, tomorrow. They're going to release them. And I bet they're a little higher. And I bet now we've completely recovered on a year-over-year basis. Year to date, we're still behind by 20% because the factories were closed in April and May. So there's still residual problems out there, but we've largely caught up. So there are certain sectors, and housing is one of them. We'll talk about that a lot later. Things have really gotten quite a bit better. the economy has moved up tremendously. We've increased GDP from last quarter on an annualized basis by over 30%. I mean, there's been terrific recovery. You see it in the retail sales numbers. You see it here. You see it in housing sales and new homes. Existing sales data is really strong, which again, we'll talk about later. So there's lots of great parts of the economy, but there's also problems in the economy. And you can see it in the next graph here, consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is going up, no question, but not going up all that much, right? It's not going up all that much. You can see where it was, and it goes up, it's down, it's up, it's a little bit down. It's generally moving up, but it's well down from where it was in the 130 range in this particular index, down to about 90. It was much, much lower in the global financial crisis of 2008-9. It was like in the 30s or 40s or 50s. This is much higher now. What's going on? Why do we feel so nervous? And the answer, I think, is very much has to do with COVID. This is at root a recession caused by a health crisis, not by a normal recession where there's a lack of confidence. People pull back in spending, mostly on goods. They still go to restaurants. They just don't buy cars and trucks. Here, it's the opposite. We're buying cars and we're buying trucks and we're not going to restaurants because of this weird thing because of Corona. And as you see in the graph, the coronavirus positive case rate, the number of tests is in blue. So we're at about 1 million tests a day now. The number of positives, the percentage of positives is in red. It's unmistakable to not notice the trend. And this trend is worrying. In Europe, they're going into lockdowns in Germany and France and Italy and Spain. All over the place, they're going into lockdowns. The fear is that we may follow them here to some extent, not a whole country, maybe not even whole states, but certainly cities or counties or whatever it is in some states as well. This is going to put a damper on economic activity. So we have the uncertainty of the election that will soon be over. We have the uncertainty of a second or third wave of coronavirus, depending on how you want to interpret it. We don't know when we're going to have a vaccine. And we don't know if we're going to get when and how we're going to get fiscal stimulus, although we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we've got parts of the economy that are performing very, very well, including housing, autos, manufacturing, and generally purchasing of goods. Services is weaker. It's also improving. We are traveling more, and we'll look at that data right now. So the first thing to look at is gasoline sales. They've kind of peaked out. As you can see, they fell by about 50% at the lockdown period. Since the lockdown period, they went right up to about 90%. In relatively short order, May, June, by the end of July, we were at 90%, and we've roughly been there since. Why? We're not going to work. It's that simple. Not going to work means 10% of gasoline consumption doesn't happen. We're going on vacation, maybe a little more to compensate, whatever, but that part's not working. Let's look at another piece of the travel world, the more hard-hit area sectors of the economy. Here's one. This is air travel. Is it improving? Yeah, it is improving. Red is where we are right now. So we're, close to 800,000-900,000 people a day. There you can see it on the graph in red compared to the blue where we were last year. We were at 2 million, quite 2.1 million versus 800,000. So we're at what, 37, 38% of normal. In the very top, you can see it. And that same percentage is the dotted line, the gray dotted line. So we're making recovery. But at this rate, it'll take another 2 years to get back to normal. And that's kind of what the airlines are thinking. This is going to take some time. Vacation travel is done better than business travel. Business travel is not so good because businesses don't want to have to indemnify folks if they get sick from coronavirus. So businesses are saying, hey, let's just do a Zoom thing like this. It'll be fine. We'll all work out. We're good to go, right? So there's sectors of the economy that I mentioned earlier, retail sales, and automobiles, and manufacturing activity, homes, doing great. But other whole swaths are prevented from the full recovery, like here, or gasoline, or for example, here in hotels. They just can't get enough. They can't get enough better, if you will. I think that's the way to think about it, right? They just can't quite get there. You can see here, hotels collapsed during the lockout of half of March and all of April. Then they turn around, they recover tremendously through here. They recover more through there. The slope is steeper here, as you can see, than it is there. And then the slope stops. And now it's no longer any improvement at all. There's nothing. And you can think about this in terms of Vegas. In Vegas, actual people going to Vegas, individual households going to Vegas, they've recovered almost half, from 3 million a month to about 1.5 million. Convention attendance is literally zero. No one's going. There's no conventions going on in Vegas. So if conventions are 700 or 800,000 and people coming is 3 million, you get 3.7 million and you're at 1.5, you're at 35, 40%. That's the problem our economy faces. Large swaths of it cannot recover until the coronavirus essentially goes away enough such that we're confident. And you see it in employment numbers. This is job postings. And you can see 2018 in beige, in 2018 in blue, 2019 in beige, 2020 in gold. And you can see the gap between where we are, gold, and where we were last year in beige or blue 2 years ago. And the gap was very big here because we were in lockdown in March and April. Then things begin to improve. And they improve dramatically through about August 1st, where my cursor is. You can see it. And what happens then? The slope softens. So the slope was like this from the end of the lockdown until August 1st. And then the slope goes like this. The shallower the slope, the slower GDP growth, the slower the recovery, the longer it takes for unemployment to go down. That's what we're watching. It's the slope. We want to see these slopes be steep as possible on the upswing or down very steeply in terms of unemployment and stuff like that. Anything that's less, as it flattens out, I go, oh, and I sort of cringe, right? So you put it all together. This is total consumption, all household consumption, everything we spend on. And there's some good news here and the bad news. The good news is we've made up a lot of distance. If you look at the graph, you can see where we were, where my cursor is, and where we are, where we were at the worst end of May or June. And then we've made a lovely recovery for a bunch of months. It was straight, nice V-shaped, steep slopes, beautiful steep slopes. And then what? Begins to move to the right. So now it went like this and then like that. And that's the beginning of a slowdown. The slope will continue to soften as we go forward, delaying the recovery. And if it goes horizontal, then we stop recovering in total. So this shows us the level of where we are and how much we still have to recover. There's still this much to go. It isn't as much as it was before, but don't be deceived. The level of our economic hole now is as big as it was back in 2008-9 at its worst. So we've made up a lot of ground. We're now just badly off as opposed to being incredibly, terribly off. And if you look at this graph and look at the month-by-month changes, you get this graph. This graph looks a lot like a graph I showed you about 10 graphs ago. This graph. There's up, there's down, up, and down. And that's what you get in a lot of these economic sequences. You get the lockdown period that's bad, where my cursor is now negative 12 or 13%, rapid recovery, and then the recovery peters out because we're buying whatever we can buy. This is buying. We're buying lots of stuff, but we're still not buying lots of services. We're not going to get a massage. I'm not going to get a massage. There's no friggin' way. I'm kidding. I actually do go, but you get my point. I'm not going to go to a bar. I'm not going to go to a restaurant. I'm not going to go to a baseball game. I'm not going to go to the opera. I'm not going to go to a tractor pull, whatever it is, right? It's not happening. So we can't get beyond where we are. Now, how about firms? Are firms going to come in and save the day? Are they going to start buying things and building plants and building equipment and building factories, employ lots of people, save the day? Not so much. Why? Look at factory utilization rates. How intensively are we using the factories that we've got? And the answer is not nearly as intensively as we did in the past. If you look in this graph here, you can see prior to the recession, we were about 77% of factory utilization. 77 to 80%, that's about the golden amount. You don't want to get much higher than that because you have really old plant, very inefficient. You don't want to get much below. When you get below that, firms say, well, I got lots of extra plant. I don't have to invest in plant, so I'm not going to. And that's precisely the problem we face. You can see it here. Massive decline in factory utilization. Car manufacturing stopped in March and April. Recreational vehicles stopped. Boats stopped. Planes stopped. Everything stopped. Now, we open the economy, people get their jobs back, things jump up. But our mines, are we mining much stuff? Oil? Not so much. How about utility plants? Not so much because we're not at work. So a lot of offices don't have to have much power going to them. So there's been a reduction in the demand for fuel. There's less mining for fuel and all kinds of stuff. Why look for ore, all kinds of metal ores if you don't need it, right? Now, firms are buying a lot of equipment, tons of equipment, because they have to figure out a way to live in a COVID-19 environment. doors that open automatically, contracts that can be signed not with paper anymore, but electronically. All kinds of technological innovations are being used as a workaround to get around the coronavirus problems. The firms are buying stuff, but they're not building things. Okay. Might firms help us by giving us dividends and share buybacks? Regrettably, not so much. They're not doing that. I wish they were, but they're not. You can see here, dividends have declined slightly. Firms are going, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Let's not take a chance. Think about, and then how about share buybacks in light blue? They happening? No, not so much. The central bank is not letting banks return dividends. They're making them hold stock buybacks, and other firms are holding back. You can think of the oil industry in Colorado being an important one, oil and gas for that matter as well. You've got gas more in like La Plata County and Mesa County, I guess. And you got oil up in Weld County. That's not doing so great. Prices aren't all that high. They're not investing in plant or equipment or exploration and production, as the case may be. So we're a little weakened there. We're weakened there because the demand for gasoline and energy and oil isn't all that high because we're not working in our offices. We're not driving to work, and we're not getting on an airplane and going on vacation. So because we don't do this, other things don't happen, and prices fall, and demand is down. Therefore, prices fall. So our economy is a two-track economy. 90% or 95% working, but 5% just isn't happening. And that's the point. That's the part that you've got to try and keep together, if you will. And the best way to keep it together is to have government intervene and give us some money. It doesn't have to give us all money because the 90 or 94% of us that have a job, we don't need the money. It's the people who don't have a job who need the money that really need the money. And you can see it here. You can see the amount of government intervention in the economy on a monthly, seasonally adjusted basis is dropped considerably, and it continues to decline. It's still helping because there's still money out there. President Trump signed the $300 per week help with people who are unemployed and so on, but this money's petering out, and it's going to impact the economy as we go forward. So we know that consumption's pretty good. We're buying stuff, we're buying cars, we're buying houses, we're buying manufactured goods. Amazon's shipping the hell out of stuff to our houses. The second term, corporate investment firms are buying stuff to work around the coronavirus, but they're not building plant and equipment. Very important and very unfortunate. Government spending hopefully comes up. There'll be some stimulus package, which we'll talk about shortly. No matter who wins, if Trump is reelected or if Biden's elected, there'll be some stimulus. We'll see how much, and that will go a long way and be very helpful. Last but not least, on the overall economy-wide perspective, it's important to look at the dollar. The dollar is weakened of late, and you can see it here. This decline is there. That shows us the decline in the dollar. It was incredibly strong. It had hit a recent, decade-long high. It went up initially way back when President Trump won election in November. That was the first spike. Then comes down, meanders, and then goes back up again recently because of, in part, the spike again because of the coronavirus crash. When coronavirus occurred, everything declined in value. Stock, bonds, gold. Everyone in the world raced to dollars. The dollar skyrockets. Since then, the world has calmed down. China's improved. Things are getting better. Our economy's made up a lot of lost ground. Dollars weaken. So you'd think that would be great for exports. Not so much. Why? America doesn't export much stuff. We used to export a lot of airplanes, but Boeing managed to screw that up but good, right? I could go on for 20 minutes talking about gross management errors at Boeing. Never be Boeing. Don't become Boeing. They took one of the great names in American aviation history and manufacturing, our single biggest exporter, and dumped it down the drain due to gross management errors and a complete, utter inability to think about risk and risk management. Tragic. And undergraduate college students could have prevented them from doing the destruction they did. That being said, I digress here. What are we good at exporting? We export education. Foreigners come to the U.S. to go to school, but they're not coming because of Corona. Tens of millions come to visit America as tourists, but they don't come because of Corona. Oh, we ship movies abroad, and they show them movie houses, but no one's going to movies in a lockdown in Europe or here for that matter. So what we're really good at is services, and they're not happening. And goods we're not so good at. And we used to ship around airplanes, but we don't do that anymore. So it's a problem. On top of that, there's a trade war going on with China. And that's going to clip off, 0.5% off GDP this year. This seems trivial compared to a 32% decline in Q2 and a 33% rise in Q3. 0.5% seems meaningless, but in the grand scheme, it's important. It's more than elevator music. It really is, because going forward, we could really use that increase in GDP. If you put all of this together, all of it together, this is GDP performance in the US economy. And it's very insightful. So let's first unpack it and see what it says. First quarter, GDP declines by 5%. Now, it doesn't actually decline by 5%. If Q1, which is 3 months, lasted 12 months, there'd be 5% decline. So roughly, think of it as roughly a quarter. 1.2 times 4 quarters gets you 5. It's a little less because there's compounding and so on, right? But think of it as 1.25% decline in Q1. In Q2, GDP just crashes by over 31%. Huge decline. Again, divided by 4, kind of, sort of. In Q3, it goes up by 31 and 32%. Again, divided by 4. So it seems like Q3, the increase in Q3 is the same as the decrease in Q2. We're even, we're fine, we're good. Okay, ignore Q1, right? But you're thinking 31 down in Q2 and 32 up and 33 up in Q3, we're kind of the same. No, don't think that way. Here's an example. GDP is $100. We go down by 30% in Q2. So where are we? We're at 70. Now we go up by 30% in Q3. That gets us to 91. We're still 9 percentage points off. 30 down percent up, 30% up. The 30% from the lower number at the end of Q2 is smaller. Therefore, you're not getting as much of a rise out of it. If you go percentage, you'd still get 30%, but in dollars, much smaller. So the economy is fundamentally smaller than it was. In Q4, as you can see, there's 2 estimates. One estimate says we get the stimulus package that includes the dark blue and the light blue. But we're not going to get the stimulus package because we're already into November. And we have a lame duck session in Congress. I'd be shocked if a lame duck session goes out and spends $2 trillion or $1 trillion or $800 billion or whatever it is. They could surprise me. I'd be delighted, but I don't see it happening. Now, I'm going to digress for a second and talk about this stimulus package that I've talked about already twice. People say, look, and there's justification for this, that look, if we have the stimulus package, we give unemployed people money, they're not going to look for a job. I accept that. The data is not all that strong there, but there's clearly some impact there. But it's not that strong, as I mentioned earlier. And I then asked you, what would you do instead? We're going to have a lot of restaurants closed down, massage parlors closed down, tourist activity closed down, restaurants closed down, stores closed down, retail stuff. They're going to close because they've tried to hold on with EIDL money and PPP money. Maybe the central bank has lent them money. It's going to end. Unemployment's going to be relatively high. So the question is, if you don't want to help stimulate the economy by giving checks, okay, I get that. There are negative consequences. What do you want to do? And if you have no other alternative, then give the money. You have to think of something else that's better before you exclude or preclude giving the checks out. So what does this economy look like? What shape is it in? There's 2 shapes to our economic. The first one is this one, the check mark recovery. Massive decline in Q1, small decline. Q2, massive decline. Q3, tremendous improvement. And then Q4 is the top of the check mark. It just keeps going slowly. That's where we are now. The easy stuff has been done. Everything that can open up quickly has. Ford, GM, Chrysler, Fiat Chrysler, they've all opened up. Restaurants have rejiggered themselves to do takeout. It's all working, but they can't do more. And restaurants are probably going to backslide now as it's winter, and it's going to be harder and harder to have outdoor service. You put people in a big tent, that doesn't solve the problem. Individual little tents, yeah, I guess that helps. You have to have a lot of energy to do that, right? There are a lot of problems here. Fire problems, not to mention cold, food getting stone cold as you deliver it. I mean, there's massive numbers of problems. But the economy is a check mark shape. Down, up quickly, and then the slope slowly shallows out as we move out. I don't think we get back to where we were on February. The distance from where our economy is now to where it was on Feb 29, a week before coronavirus, or 10 days before it hit, was 4% of GDP. That's the depth of the recession that we experienced in 2008, 2009. So we've made so much recovery. We've gotten to the point where it's only now as bad as it was 12 years ago. That puts it into perspective. Labor markets will give us some more insight. Labor markets were very, very, very tight before the recession began. You can see here the unemployment rate was remarkably low. It was 3.4 or 3.3%. It was breathtakingly low. And then it skyrockets, absolutely skyrockets. And this number is actually not right. The government made a mistake. They admitted it off the bat, but for 3 months they miscoded stuff, and the unemployment rate was actually closer to 20%. But be that as it may, it dramatically declines and is now 7.8 or 7.9. And you go to yourself, you say, hey, I mean, look, it's not great. I get it, but it's not bad. I mean, you look back at the graph, you can see here, it's back where it was in 2012. It's not so bad. I mean, that's partly my point. Our economy is now back, the worst where it was in the recession. Unemployment's actually a little better. The GDP decline's bigger. Unemployment looks better, but it's deceptive. Why is it deceptive? It's deceptive because of this. The labor force participation rate has plummeted. If you look at the last recession here, there was a decline in the labor force participation rate for men. In red, it went up for women because the men weren't working, so the women went to work. It's a good deal if you're a guy and you can stay home and play like Grand Theft Auto 26 or something. This is the overall level in black. Prior recession, the 2000 dot-com bust, labor force numbers weren't affected at all. But look at the current recession that we're in. It's plummeted for men, it's plummeted for women, it's plummeted overall in black for the whole economy. But now look even closer. The men's number is slowly trickling back up. Good. Look at the women's number. It trickled up and then it trickled down. And you go, how? What is happening? How can that be? Kids don't go to school. And what happens? Mommy stays home. Daddy says, I got to go to work, honey. Love you. Bye. And then plays Grand Theft Auto all day. Okay, I'm kidding. But it turns out the data show it. Women stay home. They don't go to work. If they can work from home, great. But if they can't, they have to quit their job. No joke. If we account for this decline in the labor force and say if the labor force got back to where it was prior to the recession, unemployment would be closer to 10%, which is roughly where it was when it peaked out 12 years ago. We have a ways to go. These numbers are deceptively good. They've come down. It's great. I'm thrilled. I'm happy. But we're not there. We cannot be complacent. That's the point. And I'm fearful that we are complacent. And we are complacent in large part because of the shape of the recovery, not the check mark so much, but the K shape of the recovery. I'm going to get there in 2 or 3 slides. But first, let's look at this slide. This slide talks about people who lose their job. So you go from employed to unemployed. This graph, if you look at the left-hand side at the bottom, shows 200,000 people a week losing their job. If the economy loses less than 300,000 a week, that's 1.3, 1.4 million, 1.35 million a month job losses. You have a great economy. You have a good economy, If it's below 900,000, 200,000 a week, like it was late last year, early this year before the pandemic, you have a rocking economy. Rocking, because you're creating many more jobs than you're losing. If you look at the left of this graph, I've only got a data going back a couple of months, but it can go back 50 years. Going back 50 years on this data, the worst single month for first-time unemployment claims prior to the pandemic that you see right now on the screen was 695,000 job losses. In the double-dip recession of 80-82, it was 695,000 for 1 week. Last week, it was 770,000. 10 times. I'm sorry, it was higher than it was at the all-time peak After 28 or 29 weeks of decline, and the peak was 7 million, 10 times the highest number all time. So if this number, the number we're at right now, the very far end of that, just dropped out of the sky, that would be the highest number in history, let alone what we've had before. And this is troubling because we've gone 27, 28, 29 weeks, 30 weeks, whatever it is, since middle of March till now. And the first-time claims for unemployment are still high because firms like Disney and Delta and United and American, and these firms are all laying off workers. They were hoping things would get better. They were hoping Congress would give them money. They were hoping a whole bunch of things. They could rejigger their business and figure it out. Travel would return quicker, whatever. But it's not happening. And you can see in this graph, there's lots and lots of turmoil in our labor markets. Now, to get good job growth, when you're losing 800,000 jobs a week, that's 3.4 million. If you want to create 500,000 net jobs, you've got to create almost 4 million new jobs a month to compensate. 4 million minus 3.4 million is 600,000. Job growth numbers that are going to come out on Friday, I hope we get 500,000. But we're still, job losses are over 10 million from where they were at the peak before the recession began. We lost 22 million. We've made up 11 or 12 million, but we're still 10 million behind. You make up 500,000 jobs a month, it's 2 years. And it'll take longer than that because it gets slower and slower and slower. Fiscal stimulus would help us some. Now, the K-shaped recovery. We forget what's going on in this recession. I'm going to show the graph later on in the housing sector, but I want to come to it now. We forget that this economy is K-shaped. There's two parts. There's the good part and the bad part. The good part says you have a job, you can work from home, you have a bachelor's degree, you make more than 70,000 bucks. If you fulfill most of those criteria, you haven't been affected, or barely. But if you're making under 40,000 and you're on the bottom of the K, this recession has been brutal, brutal. You've been exposed to coronavirus much more than you ever thought imaginable. You've had to do it to feed your family or feed yourselves. It's been a very different world here. If you're educated or skilled, or can work from home, it's great. We'll see this come through later. Unemployment rate by education vary dramatically. So we've talked about the overall economy. It's made up a lot of ground, but there's still more to go, and it'll be hard because we don't want to spend money in certain things. We've looked at, all four parts of GDP. Consumption's not bad. Corporate investment and stuff is good, but not planned. Government hopefully comes through. Exports aren't going to be a help. The labor market continues to struggle. It grows, but growth was 4 or 5 months ago, 4.5 million, then 2.5 million, then 1.5 million. And in September, it was 600,000. The October number we get in 2 days. 4.5, 2.5, 1.5, 600,000. You see the trend there is pretty clear. So we're running out of gas. We're slowing down. The easy fruit has been picked. You get the idea. It's going to get harder. The economic improvement will slow down. That's why the fill-up of a fiscal stimulus would be very helpful. Now, how about inflation? There isn't any inflation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself. This is not a concern. These people who talk about inflation, saying we're going to get inflation, I just don't see it. This is the Fed's favorite measure of inflation: personal consumption expenditure inflation. It's not CPI. It's a little bit different. During Q&A, if you want to ask me and you want me to bang your head against the wall several times, I'll be happy to explain to you the difference between the two. Suffice it to say, look at the graph. Do you see inflation? You see inflation going up. Blue is headline PCE inflation, personal consumption expenditure inflation. Red is core. Red excludes food and energy. Economists like to ignore food and energy because food and energy go up and down because of weather and war, and they're not consistent. So they don't create perpetual inflation. Yeah, oil prices go up because of a war, they drop because of corona, but this is not going to be forever. This is a one-shot deal. There's a drought or a flood or something bad happens in weather, wheat prices or soy prices skyrocket or collapse or whatever. You guys in Colorado know the eastern half of your state's full of agriculture, right? There's lots of corn, wheat, barley, oats, whatever is growing there, right? Onions. Look at this graph. You see inflation, sure, because it was super low where my cursor is. This was in March and April, and nothing was happening. Our economy was screeching to a halt. Then we come out of the chutes, the starting gates open, the horses run out, inflation goes up. All of a sudden, we don't have enough pork, we don't have enough beef, we don't have enough chicken, because all the slaughterhouses are coronavirus hothouses, if you will. But suddenly we learn how to deal with it. Car prices go up because we're not building cars, manufacturing cars. But then we figure out how to manufacture cars. And one by one, the problems get tackled. Nappies, we got enough of those. Pork chops, we're okay with. Whatever, hand sanitizer, we're working on it. You can see snippets and snappets of the economy with inflationary problems when demand is very strong and supply is weak. Restaurant prices went up for a while, but they'll come down now. It's winter. No one's going to go to a restaurant because there's nowhere to go. So we can have partial inflation here or partial inflation there, but you're not going to have systematic inflation-wide inflation with unemployment at 8, 9%. It's just not when firms at 72% of capacity utilization. It simply can't happen. Producer prices, no. Consumer prices, no. CPI prices, import prices, export prices. I don't care what kind of prices you look at. Nothing going on. Well, with no inflation, it's hard to see the Fed raising rates. So what's the Fed going to do? The Fed's going to sit on its hands and do absolutely nothing. Well, I shouldn't say that. The Fed's done a ton of stuff. They're running out of things to do, quite frankly. So now the Fed's relying on big words. They're relying on powerful words. The Fed, central bank, reminds me of the State Department. The State Department, Russia invaded Crimea or something like that, 6, 7 years ago. And the State Department said things like, we find this behavior reprehensible and we strongly disapprove of this, as if these strong adjectives will solve the world's problems. Same thing with the central bank. The central bank can't lower rates, can't buy much more. It can do some. If interest rates start to rise because of inflationary fears, the Fed can buy long-term bonds and drive interest rates down. So there are things they can still do to help. But massive amounts of help, they can't anymore. So they're now relying on strong adjectives. And while I really condone the use of strong adjectives, I also have no illusion that strong adjectives are policy. They're more like decoration, right? Because the Fed's done whatever it possibly can. That's why the Fed is saying to Congress, please come through with more money. With monetary policy done, we need now fiscal policy, and we're caught at super zero interest rates. With rates that low, it's very inexpensive to do fiscal policy. So because fiscal policy is the game in town, because monetary policy is exhausted, we need Congress to come through with something. Now, let's talk politics. Then we'll talk about housing, and then we're going to wrap it up. So elections today, we should know a lot of this stuff tonight. We'll know a lot of it by tomorrow morning, and by tomorrow night, it should hopefully, blessedly be over. The House is now Democratic. The House will remain Democratic. The House Democrats will pick up 10 seats. I think at least 10 seats. I really do. We can talk during Q&A, but 10 seats, maybe 12. They've already got a 17 or 18 seat majority. You need 217. They've got 230 or something, 232, I think it is now. They may pick up 10 more. Okay. The Senate, it's close. That's the consensus in the House, right? That's the House here. This is the Senate. Senate's close. Democrats seems to have 49 seats kind of locked up. Republicans have 46 seats locked up. This assumes that the Democrats turn over Colorado, right? Cory Gardner says bye-bye, and Hickenlooper takes his place. Susan Collins in Maine, she says bye-bye as well. In Arizona, there's a senator there. She goes bye-bye as well. Those are all Republican strongholds. They're all going to turn to Democratic seats. This is the assumption of the experts. The 3 or 4 places to watch are Montana, Iowa. So Montana, Steve Daines. Iowa, Joni Ernst. Georgia, there's 2 seats up, Sonny Perdue and the other guy who I don't remember, a woman I don't remember. And North Carolina, a guy named Tom Tillis. These are all Republicans. Republicans need to hold all of them to keep their majority. If they lose one of those, Democrats get 50 seats. It's at best in a tie of 50-50. Remember, there's 2 seats in Georgia up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 seats there, right? That's important to keep in mind, right? So I think the Republicans do not hold the Senate. I give the Democrats a 66% chance of picking up the Senate because they've only got to pick up 1 or 2 of these seats. It doesn't seem like an impossible stretch. They pick up 1 Georgia seat. So they're tied at that point, 50-50. And then if they win the White House, the vice president breaks ties and they get the Senate. So it's close, but I give the edge to the Democrats. It's the closest of the races, I think. Yeah, I think it's the closest of the races. And then the presidential race, I give it to Joe Biden. It's Joe Biden's to lose. We'll come back to the graph in a moment. Let's first look at the polls. These are polls. This is the data as of today. This slide I inserted about 3 hours ago. And you can look at all the different websites that are putting out data. You know, website 538, Princeton Inside Elections, Electoral Vote, Larry Sabato, Cook's Political Report, Charlie Cook, you know, Real Clear Politics. You look at the numbers across them. If there's anything resembling blue here, Biden, 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 tie, barely Biden, call it a tie, and slightly Biden. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are strongly Biden, 1 that's mediocre light, and 2 that are a tie. Could the polls be wrong? You better believe they can be wrong. For sure they can be wrong. Last time they were wrong by a few percentage points in the Midwest. But this time there are many more polls going out there. There are better polls. There are fewer undecideds. And last time, Trump benefited immeasurably from the fact that Clinton was also an unpopular candidate. Both were unpopular back then 4 years ago. Biden may not be the love of anybody's life, but no one dislikes him. The story here is very different. And Biden, of course, is the incumbent. He has to fight against COVID. His situation is quite a bit different than it was last time. That said, so he's got, I think, an 8 or 9 percentage point lead in the general election. Under normal conditions, I'd say a guy with a 9% deficit, 55 to 45 ballpark, that's 10% points. But you get the idea. I'd say they're walking dead. Trump ain't walking dead because the election is not a national election. It's 50 states. And that's the important part. And you've got to watch a bunch of states here. So this is the way the experts see it. The experts see Trump picking up all the super Republican states, the strongly leaning states, and the 38 leaning Republican states. Fine. Biden picks up the strong Democratic states, the strongly leaning 29, and he picks up the leaning Democratic states, of which there are 78 votes. Those states include Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and a couple of the one in New England, New Hampshire. Who cares? It's small. It doesn't matter. Kind of matters. Biden picks those all up, and he wins. So now it gets interesting. Trump, to win, has to pick up the 4 or 5 swing votes in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa. And then he's going to pick up 1 or 2 of these leaning Democratic states. Pick up Pennsylvania and Michigan, or Minnesota and Wisconsin. You get the idea, some combo like that to win. Not impossible by any stretch, because he's polling pretty well in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those are close states. If he picks up all those and the toss-ups, you got a serious race on your hands. So he can lose, California big and whatever. That's why I give him a 1 in 10 chance of pulling this out. Now, 4 years ago, I gave Trump in a bad call that I made a 37% chance or a 35% chance of winning. I've reduced it to 10 this time because there are fewer undecideds, right? There's a lot of different things going on. And last time, the tremendous large number of undecideds, and they swung to Trump. And the leads between Trump and Clinton kept moving over the course of the last months of the race. This time, there hasn't been any of that. But there has been massive early voting. Who does this favor? We'll see. But the historical data doesn't help us here. The historical data doesn't give us any insight on this. So we really don't know. But what we do know is this. We know that Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina will all be closed by 7:30 East Coast time. Moreover, they're all going to count their ballots fast, and they're going to tell us the results by voting method. So did you go to the polls to vote today, or did you early vote by mail earlier? If we know in those 3 states how you vote, so the polls are expected to be very strongly Trump. The mail is expected to be very strongly Biden. If this is true, the experts will be able to figure out and handicap the race pretty quickly if we know that data. Now, if Biden wins all 3 of the elections over, go home. It's done. Biden has won. Because if Trump doesn't pick up Florida, as I said before, those tight races, he needs to win those races. If Biden doesn't win those three, it's still a race. But if Biden wins them all, it's done. It's over. So we could know as early as when those three states report their numbers. We may not. If Biden wins two of the three, we got a horse race. If Trump doesn't win Florida, he has a very hard road to go. Now, let's look at some policy outcomes that could happen. If we have the status quo, we have the red dotted line. Nothing much happens. Republicans stay as is. Democrats remain in the House. If the Republicans pick up the House, which is exceptionally unlikely, we go to the solid red line. Not much meaningfully changes. If Biden wins and the Republicans keep the Senate, reasonable probability there, it's a little more expansionary because we'll get a little more fiscal stimulus, I think, but maybe not. But it's not going to change the deck chairs much. What changes the deck chairs dramatically is a Democratic sweep. Now, you may like that or you may not. That's a whole separate conversation. But the expectation is there'll be massive stimulus at that point. $1.5 or $2 trillion of stimulus coursing through the economy in end of 20 and 21, juicing GDP, helping push down unemployment, maybe causing some inflation, causing the Fed to buy, and generally pretty good stuff. Now, how does this happen? What's Biden's plan? And this is not the stimulus plan of Biden. This is his future plan. And you can see here, it's certainly expansionary compared to what prior recent candidates have had. But compared to what Elizabeth Warren proposed or what Bernie Sanders proposed, it's breathtakingly limited. It's 3.5% of GDP over a decade. GDP is $20 trillion. Over a decade, $200 trillion. This is $7 trillion. So it's plenty stimulative. And then there's also the short-term stimulus as well, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion there. So there'll be lots of stimulus coming with Biden. And the money gets spent. Where does it get spent? It gets spent in here. Education, it gets spent in healthcare, it gets spent in infrastructure, research and development, housing a little bit, affordable housing and so on, and a couple other things in safety net issues, Social Security and whatever. He pays for it with taxes, here, 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 and here, and some good old deficit spending. So Biden, whether you like him or not, he's going to do stimulus in the short run and more stimulus, deficit spend, and raise taxes. All in all, a decent picture. I think if Trump wins, we get more deregulation, maybe some tax cuts, but I doubt it. If he doesn't get the House, he can't pass anything major. I don't think it really matters economically in the adding up the dollars, how we get there, Trump's method or Biden's method. There are big differences. Some of you are going to be much better off with one or the other, but the overall macro level, I think they get to roughly very similar places, right? Don't vote for one or the other based on economics, vote on for other reasons. Now, who's going to pay the taxes that Biden imposes? It looks like it's going to be the upper 1%, essentially. The bulk of the tax money is going to come here a little bit, the top 5%, 4%, 5%, top 1 and top 1/10 of 1%. They're going to be paying the freight here. There's not quite enough money there. That's why we're going to deficit spend on top. But that's what's going to happen. And markets are already assuming this will happen. You can see it in things like this, graphs that over the last couple of months have become increasingly favorably inclined. This is energy, types of clean energy and stuff, right? You can see it in the price of oil companies like Exxon and Chevron declining. The biggest energy company now, clean energy company, or one that has, is worth more than Exxon is. There's big changes afoot here, regardless of who wins. The cost of renewable resources has gotten cheaper. Renewable energy, wind and solar has gotten cheaper. Natural gas has gotten cheaper as well. Coal is no longer really effective. There's all kinds of stuff like that going on. Now let's talk about real estate. Real estate is the single strongest sector in the entire economy. And you are remarkably lucky to live in a vacation communities like Breck and Keystone. So people from the East Coast and the West Coast are saying, oh my God, I don't want to live in my condominium in downtown Manhattan or in Los Angeles, cheek by jowl with neighbors. I want to move where the air is clean and there's grass and there's space. I move into Breck. And they move to Summit and they move to Eagle County, right to Vail. And they moved to Pitkin County, Snowmass Village, and Aspen, right? These are prime locations for people to move to because there's space, there's no COVID, it's all lovely and beautiful. It may have been a COVID hotspot 7 months ago, but it isn't now. And you can see this generally in this graph. Look at this. First-time mortgage apps are 20-25% above where they were before. So the V is now, this side of the V, the recovered side, is higher than where it was before the recession began. But, big but, it's not going to get better. This graph shows us overlay of 2020 in blue compared to all the prior years. And you can see the gap between 2020 and 2019. It declined, it went up, that super V, and then it's been flat ever since. The gap, the differential, this distance where my cursor is kind of the same here as it is here. I don't think we get sales, house sales national that are much better than they are. And they're pretty fantastic. Look at this graph. Look where we are now vis-a-vis to where we were. Wow, what a difference. It's amazing. There was pent-up demand from before the recession began. People were buying homes and things were already good. You can see here in the graph here, this was the run-up to the recession. Things were improving dramatically. Rates had come down. Rates were high here. Rates come down. Rates go up. Sales go down. Rates go down. Sales go up. Things are good. And then there's a pent-up demand from the lockdown of March, April. And then there's pent-up demand from coronavirus itself. People go, I hate my house. I hate living nearby. I don't want neighbors. I want a yard. I want a pool, whatever it is. I got to get out of here. And they move to where you are. Now, why the prices are going up too? Why is there all this crazy demand? Because there's nothing to buy. 12 years ago, when we had last recession, there were 4 million homes for sale, existing homes. Now there's barely 1.5. There's nothing out there to buy. If you can't buy an existing house, what do? You go to a home builder and say, build me a house. So guess what happened? That's what people are doing. So home sales, new home sales, you can see on the graph here where my cursor was, were pretty good at almost 800,000. They collapse in the virus, and then they shoot up to 1 million because the builder says, fine, sign the lease. So you get some paper, you sign the lease, and then the builder says, oh, by the way, and give me the $50,000 deposit. And then the builder says, oh, by the way, I'm busy till 6 months from now. I'm not going to start your house. So there's the number of sold houses that haven't been built is 300,000. It's the biggest it's been in decades, since 04, 05. And the world's a different place. But here too, I think we've peaked out. You can see the gap between 2019 in gray here, brown, and 2020 in blue. The difference is now getting cited a normal. So, and you can look at the prior graph and you can see the last 2 months, it hasn't really changed. So home building starts, sales are fixed, are as high as they can go. Existing sales probably are about as high as they can go. And part of the reason for existing sales being so strong is there are no spec houses to buy either. You can see here there were almost 600,000 12 years ago with the global financial crisis, but now there's barely half. So there are 3/8 the number of new homes. There are 3/8 existing homes from 4 million to 1.5. Less than half, about half the existing homes from 580,000 to about 280,000 or so. Starts are doing pretty well. Single fam starts in red are terrific. They went down, but they came back up. Multifam ain't doing so well because people aren't paying their rent, but that's okay in the short run. It'll turn around. Overalls in green doing fine and will continue to maybe go up a little more, but not a lot. You have to get workers to go from multi into single because singles where people want. They don't want to have a neighbor upstairs, downstairs, to the left or to the right. And on top of this, there's this home price appreciation going because demand from before the recession, because of the lockdown, and because of coronavirus itself is driving demand. And there's nothing to buy on the existing or new side. So prices, as you can see in this graph, continue to go up. And demographically, this isn't over. Demographically, this has legs. The light blue are the youngest millennials. They're aging into home buying. Yellow is the home buying age, prime home buying age. And you can see they're moving into it. The older millennials in dark blue, they've already bought a house or on the verge of buying a house. But you got this even bigger cohort of younger millennials between 26 and 34, 33, 8-year, 9-year span. They were driving, the light blue and dark blue were driving multifam for a long time. But now the pendulum swings and they're going to drive single fam. So single fam is going to be strong and rates are going to stay low for the foreseeable future. The Fed said a number of times they aren't even thinking about raising interest rates. And pending sales are ridiculously good. you can see here, they collapsed, they recovered, and now they're going out a little bit, so the slope is declining, but they're higher now than they were then. Massive recovery, but like existing sales and new sales, it's kind of stopping. This can't go on forever, right? And you can see it right here. If you compare this year in dark blue to last year in light gray, the gap between these is generally flat the last couple of months. That's why I don't expect pending sales to lead to more actual sales, closing sales, because the pending is very strong. It's stronger than it was, but the gap between last year and this year is pretty much flat. So we can stay good. And there's things that can make this better. The demographics can make it better, keep it strong. Maybe not quite as strong, but strong. And it's harder to get credit. Credit availability is sunk from the upper 180s, according to the American Bankers Association, mortgage bankers, down to about 115, much, much lower. 12 years with the global financial crisis, it was at almost 900. So Dodd-Frank has made credit much harder to get even before the recession began. And now it's gotten much harder again. And despite this, there's still tremendous demand. And now to talk about this K-shaped recovery I spoke about earlier, this shows it clearly. Have a look. If you're college educated in Orange, unemployment's not even 5%. But if you don't have a high school diploma, it's more like 12. Big difference. Education has been critical. If you're well educated, you aren't on the front lines, you're not driving a bus, you're not doing retail, you're not delivering for Grubhub, and you're staying home and you're safe and your job is secure. But if you're working retail, it's a very different world out there. Now, and the stock market's held up remarkably doing well. What's the fly in the ointment? The fly in the ointment is foreclosures or forbearance, but they're going down too. There were a total of 5 million homes in forbearance. Over the last couple of months, 6, 7 months, 2 million went away. So we're at 3. Of those 3 million, about 2.5 are in a formal forbearance program. So they've added on the principal to the end of the loan and so on. That leaves 500,000. 500,000? Who cares? That's last month's existing home sales. No, even if they all went into foreclosure in a few months, it wouldn't even matter. Let's close up by looking at what's going on here, and then we'll take some questions. Unemployment, I compared Summit to Eagle and Pitkin. You're all similar. You're different. I know you're closest to Denver and so on. You know, and people think of vacation out east or something, Vail or Aspen. Okay, I get it, right? But you're wonderfully located. First stop on the vacation circuit. People go to the mountains and ski. I've skied there a zillion times. I love it. Unemployment is a little bit higher where you are. Compared to being a little bit lower. Let's see where these things settle out, but it's a little bit worse in Summit County, right? Labor force growth had been pretty much the same in all the counties for a while. It got really, it's now worse. It's now a little worse here. It was better for a month, whatever that means. The data is really weird now. It's a little worse here than it is in Eagle and Pitkin. But again, let's see how it goes. But at the moment, it's a little worse. The last graph, a little worse. This graph, a little worse. This graph, however, a little better. This is house price appreciation through the end of 19. I don't have data for 20. But you can see here, your prices grew less rapidly prior to the last recession, went down less than the others in the pit, and have now recovered and grown more quickly than Eagle and Pitkin. So you've done better in this one. In terms of population growth, very interesting story. Everywhere the slopes were pretty steep, everywhere, except maybe here, right, in Pitkin. Too expensive again. And then in 2000, 210, whatever, 2000 really here, a little bit later here, kind of stopped. Not much growth the last couple of years. And if you look at the rate of growth, this is level of population. You look at growth, you can look at the last 10 years since the last global financial crisis. Very little population anywhere. More here in Eagle and Summit, I'm sorry, than anywhere else, but not all that much, right? So there's something changed. It's gotten expensive, but because now it's all different because of Corona, right? But prior to Colorado, you can see great place to live. Everybody's population growth is going up fast. 7th fastest growing state in the country by gross numbers, and 8th fastest by total percentage increase in population. You have great weather, skiing, resorts, hiking, biking, It's beautiful where you are. Sunny skies, 375 days a year of sunshine, from what I hear, right? And last but not least, if you look at where growth has been over the last 10 years, in the East Coast, it's confined to these 4 states, with Florida winning. And out west, it's from Texas up to Washington, but the star performers are Texas, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and Idaho, one of which is Colorado. The state's doing okay. The country has made huge improvement. This is how to get a hold of me. This is my cell phone, phone number, Twitter, email, all those ways to reach me. And I put out every day 70 words on the economy. No graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, and no photos. If you want to get it, you can email me at elliot@graphsandlaughs.net, or you can text, wait for it, Bowtie, one word, Bowtie, one word, no hyphen, no space, to the 5-digit number 228. Text Bowtie to 22828. You'll be prompted for an email address. You'll hear from me every day until you die. The economy has made huge strides. There's still more to go. We're about 4 percentage points behind where we were before the recession began in end of February. That's as bad as it was at the worst of the global financial crisis. We've made a long way. We've made up 3/4 or 4/5 or 7/8, but there's still a big chunk, and it's the hardest chunk. Government assistance will be of big help. If Biden wins and the Democrats get the Senate, there'll be lots of stimulus package. The economy will grow faster, unemployment will come down, taxes will rise, right? So the taxes rise will push the stock market down, but the fiscal stimulus will push it up. Under Trump, if he wins re-election, there'll be more deregulation, maybe a little bit of tax cuts, but I don't think so. If I had to bet, Democrats keep the House and widen their majority. Democrats gain a sliver-thin majority in the Senate. Biden wins the White House, but Trump's got a 1 in 10 chance. Interest rates don't go anywhere for a long time. I hope I've given you some food for thought, and housing is the single best sector in the economy, followed by automobiles and manufacturing and goods, be it durable or non-durable goods, because we're not buying services. I hope I've given you some insights. We have 5 minutes for questions. I've taken too long. I apologize. And thank you, thank you, thank you. At this point, I'll stop sharing, and we'll see if there are some questions. Let me stop sharing.
Thanks, Elliot. If anybody has any questions, you can put them into the Q&A or into the chat. I was just gonna really quickly look through.
Thank you.
I don't see anything right now. So I'll give you guys something, just a few minutes while we do this. We have a giveaway for everybody who's attending today. And I'm just using a random number generator based on the people who are in the class right now. So the number—
Thank you, Patricia, by the way.
Oh yeah. So the number is number 4. So the winner is Amy Nakos. Amy, you won a Treat Yourself package. It's some spa services, courtesy of BGV Gives, that'll be good at any one of their 3 locations. And there's going to be some happy hour gift certificates, and it'll just be like a lovely Treat Yourself package. So I'll touch base with you in time to get that package to you. And then we're just seeing, I did just see one question. Oh, Bill Wazinski said it was really fun to watch, so thank you. And then another question, would you consider US a huge exporter of microchips?
US is a pretty big exporter of microchips, absolutely. And the trade war with China is certainly going to impinge on that in a big way. China will eventually become self-sufficient and independent in chips. How long that takes, I don't know. And will Biden relax it? Probably a little bit, but I think that the fight with China will continue regardless of who's in the White House. I think Trump has elevated China, elevated our realization, our understanding of who China is and what they are. And they are a mortal enemy of ours. I cannot make this more explicit. It's not implicit, it's explicit. It took us 50, 60, 70 years with the Soviet Union, and their economy was garbage. The Chinese have a great economy. It's growing. There's issues. They got problems with population, but they are an enemy of ours. There's no question. They don't want what we want. They want Taiwan back to them, and so on and so forth. But trade will be an economic irritant for sure under either administration.
Thank you. And it looks like everything else that's coming in is just thank yous.
Well, I must have answered every question. Joseph, thank you. Thank you all for these lovely stream of comments that are coming in. I appreciate it. I look forward to hopefully seeing you next time in person somewhere at some beautiful ski resort. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much too. And if you guys did not get Elliot's contact information, I'm going to be emailing out that the text Bowtie to 22828, and then we'll have his email address also in the email that comes out. It'll just be like a follow-up email with the links, maybe if you attended the first session, and then from his session too. So
well, that's why I shouldn't be so narcissistic to think these compliments are all coming to me.
No, they are all coming from
no,
you.
but there are other panelists as well.
About you. Thank you so much. It's awesome to have you. I'm
great.
really excited. And I think we're done. So thank you everybody who attended. Tomorrow, starting on the 4th, we will start our giveaways for the affiliates. So if you go to our social media and you're entered to win. Same thing, we'll do a random number generator based on the number of people who like on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll win the giveaway. Each giveaway, just like in the past, is worth at least $50. So you have like several opportunities to win, and it's gonna be one a day for a couple of weeks. Right now, we've got at least 2 weeks worth of giveaways. So check out our social media. If you're not already liking us, you can absolutely just plug it in and search. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off. Elliot, thank you so much. It was a pleasure working with you. I absolutely adored it.
I look forward to meeting your all the members and all the realtors down the road. But thank you guys.
Yeah, definitely. We can't wait.
All the best.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna end this right now. Have a great day.